Hello, in this Chapter 10 video, we'll be focusing in on dementia, specifically Alzheimer's disease. So by the end of the video, you should understand what the umbrella of dementia is, what neurotransmitter and brain region is involved in Alzheimer's disease, what are the two abnormal structures that a lot of researchers focus in on in Alzheimer's disease, and how Alzheimer's disease is treated. So Alzheimer's disease is just one type of dementia, and it falls under what we call the umbrella of dementia, where thoughts and behavior impairments disrupt everyday life. So some different kinds of dementia are listed here, and the two most common are going to be Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia, and that's why they're the largest here. Some others that we'll talk about are Lewy body disease and Parkinson's related dementia when we get to the movement chapter. We won't really talk about frontotemporal dementia, but it is, of course, important. And then alcohol related dementia, Wernicke's-Korsakoff's disease, we'll also talk about later on in this semester. Alzheimer's disease we're going to focus in on in this video as it affects about approximately 60% or accounts for approximately 60% of dementia cases. 13% of adults over the age of 65 have dementia, and this number increases exponentially over the age of 65. So dementia is an age-related disease. Again, we're going to focus in on Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease is characterized by a gradual progressive loss of memory. Now, thinking about what we talked about in previous videos for Chapter 10, something that we talked about when we talked about anatomy, what brain region do you think might be affected first in Alzheimer's disease? The hippocampus. So neuronal loss starts in the hippocampus, and you can see here's preclinical Alzheimer's, mild to moderate, and severe. And you can see it's starting here in the hippocampus, and then by the end it's spread to all over the brain, including cortical areas. Now, going back to the hippocampus, where neuronal loss starts in Alzheimer's disease, do you remember the neurotransmitter involved that we talked about earlier in the semester? What type of cells are lost in the hippocampus that is characteristic of Alzheimer's disease? Do you remember that neurotransmitter? Acetylcholine. So early on in Alzheimer's disease, we have damage to acetylcholine producing neurons that are housed within the hippocampus. So again, that neuronal loss begins in the hippocampus, and later you can see in these images that that cell loss spreads to cortical areas. So if Alzheimer's disease is beginning in the hippocampus, what type of memory impairments do you think we see first? Yes, declarative memories, specifically kind of episodic memories. So once we have those damage to those cortical areas, we're going to start seeing impairments in reasoning, attention, language, and performing simple everyday tasks. And that's what makes Alzheimer's disease so debilitative. And then here's another image just showing you what a healthy brain looks like compared to an individual with severe Alzheimer's. And you can see how much cell loss we've had and how much the brain has shrunk in individuals that have Alzheimer's disease. So what is thought to cause this cell loss? And while there's lots of different theories out there, and we'll talk about some of the newer ideas later on in the video, the main thing that's been looked at for a really long time is accumulation and clumping of brain proteins. And there are two particular proteins that researchers have been looking at and researching for a really long period of time. The first one is amyloid beta protein. So amyloid beta plaques form outside the neurons, and that's what you can see here. We have the amyloid protein, here's the neuron, and outside in the synaptic regions you have this clumping of amyloid protein into these plaques, and that prevents the cells from communicating effectively, and if cells can't communicate, they're going to eventually die. Some research suggests that this accumulation starts years before there's any symptoms. And the plaques also may be causing inflammation, which is what a lot of researchers are currently looking at today, is the inflammatory process in the brain, not just with Alzheimer's, but with other neurodegenerative diseases as well. And how can we stop this inflammation? If we can stop this inflammation, can we at least prevent the progression of the disease, or could we even reverse the damage? Tau protein is the other protein that accumulates and clumps in the brains of individuals with Alzheimer's disease. Now, this is going to occur inside the neuron. So here again, we have a neuron. This is a healthy neuron, showing you that there's no amyloid beta plaque and the tau protein is functioning healthily in a healthy way. And here inside the neuron, the tau protein that's part of those microtubules has started to clump, and that prevents the movement of proteins and other things necessary to keep that cell alive. So my understanding is that the tau accumulation doesn't occur until the amyloid beta plaques reach a certain point in the brain. So there's some sort of tipping point at which the tau starts to form. And again, the tau protein is going to form tangles inside the neuron. So if you want to remember the difference, think tau tangles and amyloid plaques. So both of these are characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. And you have groups of researchers that have been looking at amyloid beta plaques for years. And if you go to neuroscience conferences, you're going to see rows and rows of people that have posters and are presenting on amyloid beta protein. And then you're going to have another set of rows on tau protein plaques. And I haven't been to one of those conferences in a while, but I'm guessing now you also have another whole group that's looking at the inflammatory process in the brain. And here's just another image showing you again the plaques that are accumulating outside the neuron and the tangles that are accumulating inside the neuron. So what are some of our risk factors for developing Alzheimer's disease? So the number one risk factor is going to be age. And that's something that we can't control, right? You get older, and as we said earlier, over the age of 65, your risk of developing dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease, increases exponentially. And that is the single greatest factor, the single greatest risk factor. Genetics also plays a role, but it probably accounts for less than 1% of cases. There's at least 4 genes that have been identified that are associated with the risk, with ApoE4 being one of them that has the greatest impact. There's others, presenilin 1 and 2, and APP, which is on chromosome 21. But keep in mind that these are going to increase the risk factor or the risk, but they don't necessarily mean you're going to get the disease. It's just like the breast cancer gene doesn't mean that you're going to get breast cancer. It just means it increases your risk. And so you need to be more cautious, right? There's also early onset versus late onset. And we'll kind of see this as we start talking about different disorders between now and the end of the semester, that earlier onset seems to have more of that genetic component to it, versus late onset, which is just the kind of the wear and tear of the brain. As you get older, things, maybe your brain's not cleaning out those plaques and tangles as efficiently as it once was. Head injuries also increase risk. So while age and genetics we can't control, head injuries, accidents happen, right? But you can do things like, if you're riding a bicycle, wear a helmet, right? Make sure you're buckling your seatbelt when you're in a car to try to prevent head injuries as much as possible. Sleep is also seemed to have a big impact, and we'll see as we go on as well that sleep seems to be disrupted in a lot of different disorders. And when we talked about sleep, we saw how important it is, right? So during that slow wave sleep, that lymphatic system seems to be cleaning out the brain, perhaps cleaning out those plaques and tangles. And so in an individual who doesn't develop Alzheimer's disease, maybe the system is working properly. And in someone who does, maybe their lymphatic system can't keep up with the accumulation of these proteins. And something similar might be happening in other diseases like Parkinson's disease and Huntington's disease. Well, Huntington's disease is a little different. Heart health is another one, right? So where, again, as age and genetics we can't control, head injury, sleep, we can make sure we get enough sleep, right? That we're getting enough sleep so that we have that important slow wave sleep. Heart health is something else we can control. There's some genetics involved and some aging involved, right? But we can control at least our diet and exercise. We can make sure we're eating healthy, that we're getting regular exercise, and that can help keep our heart healthy. So things like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol can all impact your risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. So unfortunately at this time, there's no known cure. There's always some promising treatment around the corner, clinical trials that are going on, and hopefully one of these days we'll find something that will at least halt the progression of the disease, if not be able to reverse it and bring memories back for those that have been affected. So for now, our drugs are going to target the symptoms. And in the early stages, remember, what is the main symptom of Alzheimer's disease? Memory impairments. And what area of the brain are those memory impairments occurring due to loss of neurons? What area of the brain is affected, I guess, causing these memory impairments? The hippocampus. Do you remember the neurotransmitter that we want to target? Yes, acetylcholine. So we want to increase acetylcholine activity. So drugs target the symptoms, these memory impairments, by trying to increase acetylcholine activity. And we do that using something called cholinesterase inhibitors. So a cholinesterase inhibitor is going to inhibit the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. So again, thinking back to earlier in the semester when we talked about 2 ways that neurotransmitters can be inactivated, there was enzymatic breakdown and reuptake. And I said it was very important to understand those basic processes because we'd be coming back to them a lot towards the end of the semester. So this is one of the times we're going to talk about that enzymatic breakdown. So cholinesterase inhibitors, they're going to improve memory impairments by preventing the breakdown of acetylcholine. So here we have a synapse with no drug, right? So we have our neurotransmitter in the presynaptic terminal. It's released. It binds those receptors on the postsynaptic cell. And then acetylcholinesterase is going to break that acetylcholine down into inactive components here. When we have an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, it blocks this acetylcholinesterase so it doesn't break down acetylcholine. And so at the synapses that are healthy and left intact, we now have more neurotransmitter. There's also some promising research that's come out of MIT. For about the past 10 years, they've been looking at this, and it's a non-invasive treatment. It involves sound waves and a strobing light at the 40 hertz level, which is called gamma stimulation. And basically what they found is they can decrease the number of amyloid plaques in the brain as well as decrease inflammation. They've also found that it can improve the memory of animals. So the research is very new, but there have been some clinical trials. The research started in 2016. In 2020, there have been 2 phases of clinical trials. COVID prevented a full follow-up to the treatment, but there were positive results that suggested more research was needed. So a 2021 review suggested that 1 hour daily of 40 hertz stimulation was promising. So there's, again, a video link in the module that will explain a little bit more, but this research is promising. And again, it's non-invasive and it doesn't involve drugs and things like that. So we'll see where it goes. But basically the idea is that it decreases the amyloid plaques and tau tangles. There's also another drug that seems very promising. Again, there'll be a video link in the module that you can watch, but it's called lecanemab. And a doctor friend mentioned it to me. An 18-month study found that it slowed the progression of mild clinical impairment, or MCI, that would eventually result in Alzheimer's disease. It is an IV infusion of an antibody that clears amyloid beta from the brain. And so the video will talk about the 2023 results.